Jesus didn't have a problem with people that's in the streets. He had a problem with religious people.
How can I help anybody when when I was not even able to help my own son?
I would never do that. I would never do that. And I became that in a matter of minutes when they took my pain pills away.
And I said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be.
This is Faith in Your Recovery. I am Randy Davis. Welcome to the battle. As always, we so appreciate you joining us here at Faith in Your Recovery. We welcome your contacts. We welcome comments, questions. We'll try to address those questions the best we possibly can. So we look forward to this time. Coming to us from, and I say this with a special heart today because we just returned, Caroline, from a week long in the Cumberland Mountains in the Sparta, Tennessee area, and had a lot of family in Crossville. Had a family reunion. We stayed in an Airbnb up in the mountains, and it just blew me away. We're flatlanders here in Indiana, and I'm a little envious of the views that we had and the beauty of it all. So coming to us from the eastern mountains of Tennessee, Caroline Beidler. Welcome, Caroline.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And yes, you had a definite treat. That just beauty and majesty of the mountains are something. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, so kind of the same. A lot of flat land, a lot of cornfields, So, the mountains are something special about Eastern Tennessee. That's for sure.
You've got to slow down your lifestyle a little because on some of those roads, you don't dare hurry or you're going to end up experiencing the mountain in a way you don't want to. But it was fun. It was great to connect with my wife's family, the family reunion. We had about 75 folks there. The weather was wonderful. We had family with us. So, thanks for joining us here. Let's go back to, I believe it was episode 92 where we first connected. We first had an interview and you told us your story of life. You told me of how you got into told our folks the way you got into writing and blogging, your advocacy for those in recovery. Kind of give us an 8-10 minute overview of that to catch the folks up, and they can go back to episode 92 and get it all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm happy to do that. So I won't go back to the way beginning, say, when I was born in, Dubuque, Iowa, which I was. I won't go back that far. But, I will say my life really started out purposeless, hopeless, kind of directionless. I experienced a lot of trauma as a young person, and that led me to seek out really any mode of escape that I could, any way to comfort myself, any way to cope with some of the really hard things I was feeling. And so, my life quickly spiraled out of control, and I was deep into addiction as a teen and struggled into my young adulthood, really into my 20s, until I encountered recovery through an incredible community of other people like me who had experienced similar things and who were really we were trying to find our way, we were really seeking. And in my 20s also, my faith journey really connects with my recovery journey. And I started not only seeking recovery, but seeking God and seeking faith in a new way. And so, my early years were really hard, but also looking back, I can see now the way that God really moved through a lot of the hard things that I experienced and a lot of the struggle. And today I'm able to use a lot of what I've learned, and also I feel like a lot of those experiences of struggle and trauma weren't lost, that God's been able to redeem those experiences for me and do something new in my life with them. And, you mentioned writing and blogging. I really feel at this point in my life, I'm, now not a young adult, I'm middle-aged, I guess. I can own that. At this point in my life, I really feel called and moved to be of service in the recovery community, in the faith community, by not only sharing my story, but sharing what I've learned and hopefully helping to guide other folks along this journey of recovery and healing.
I I like your allusion there to your search for God and the way He turned your story, your struggles into victories, and the way
Mhm.
you've opened your heart with a willingness to share that,
Mm.
not just for your own healing, but for His glory and to help others see there is a way out. And
Mm.
as in, I believe, most every case, trauma plays a major role in addiction in that start. And we all face different experiences, good, bad, and ugly, and some with that the trauma that they create and everything. We're just searching for something to help us through at that moment. It's not always the best answer.
Mm.
I know that your most recent book, I I wanna hear how much it deals with that, but it's
Mhm.
"You Are Not Your Trauma," correct on the title?
Mhm. Yes, yes, sir. I have this fun picture here behind me. I have a copy right here. You are not your trauma. Uproot unhealthy patterns and heal the family tree. So it really kind of digs into this idea of, what does it mean to be impacted by trauma? Because, like you said, so many of us are. I would say probably most of, if you're a human, you can raise your hand. You've been through something hard, right? But I feel like, from my experience and so many of the other women that I've worked with, I wasn't able to recognize that trauma was impacting me in a negative way until I was early into my recovery. It took, you know, almost 2 decades of trying to get help and seeking out solutions and, for mental health providers to, all sorts of things I was trying to fix myself, to find help. But it wasn't until I learned about the way that trauma impacted me and not just my trauma, but my family trauma, my mother's trauma. My mother co wrote the book actually with me. The way that family trauma or intergenerational trauma really was impacting me in so many ways. And so I think it's a really important conversation that recovery communities and faith communities, all communities that we can have around this idea of how is trauma impacting us and how can we break free from that identity that we are what happened to us, that we're so much more than that.
What was it that inspired you to believe, or how did it come about that your mom was able to co-author this with you? I know she saw the struggles, some of them, maybe not all of them, I don't know.
Mm.
But, she was aware of your hurts, your pains, and the battle that life had become for you. So
Mhm.
what drew her into this? And tell us a little about her experiences and backgrounds as well.
Yeah, well, my mom, so Diana Dallas, and unfortunately she couldn't join us today, but it was about 2 years ago. I, was checking our mail, and in the mailbox, I had this thick manila envelope, and it was from my mom. And I opened it up, and it was basically like a manuscript. It was all, and she's written her whole life, journaled, and done a lot of writing herself. And it was, basically a book. And I started reading it and just was blown away. I was so moved by not only her own story of being a survivor of trauma, but also how she so beautifully talks about her experience. She's really a poet too at heart. And so her writing was just so moving. And at the same time, interestingly, I was also writing about trauma, but in a different way. And I had my first book come out and I didn't really know if I was going to keep writing. I just didn't know what God wanted for me at that point. But I've always also written. And so I was working on some things, and it was just so interesting how there were these threads that were weaving together as I was reading her work and looking back on what I had been doing. And I remember calling her and saying, Mom, I think there's something here. And we started working together and talking about what it would look like to write a book together, not just like a account of all the horrible things we've been through, not at all that, not focusing on specific ways we'd been traumatized, but how we were able to move through that and hopefully help other people understand and realize that they don't have to identify with their trauma anymore, and there is a way to gain freedom from some of those things. So it's been a really beautiful experience. Today, we get to interview together and do different things together, and it's always been a dream of hers to have a published book as well. And so I feel like being able to do this with my mom is truly one of the greatest joys of my life so far. So
So it sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong here, like both of you were of the same thoughts, the same ideas, not necessarily in the book, but within your own hearts and minds. This is
mhm,
something I want to express coming from both of you. And you were able, after getting that packet of the seed of the book, it sounds like. Once you
mhm.
receive that, you and your mom were able to come together to discuss it and then put it on paper.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly what happened. I mean, and it's been a several year process as writing books are. It's not just something that all of a sudden it comes together. It's a lot of work and hard work, but we're just so motivated to get this story out. And I think what's really interesting and unique about this book is that my mom and I can share pieces of our story, and it's just so apparent how that trauma line links through generations. And it's something that I am committed to, um, breaking that cycle for my children, for this next generation. And I think, ultimately, one of my hopes for the book is that it helps motivate people to want to go deeper with their healing, because really we owe it to the next generation. I don't want to pass along the same bonds and same issues and struggles that have been in my family. I want more for my children. So.
And I'm guessing your mom felt the very same, and that's why she sent you those documents, those
Mhm.
thoughts on paper. Uh, I remember one of the individuals that we've interviewed along the line made the comment something like trauma is life that's unfinished.
Mm.
That he
Mhm.
simply meant that we've got to pursue that cause, we've gotta deal with it. Some of it
Mhm.
even relive, within our minds and hearts.
Mhm.
But the ultimate goal, we can't be complete until we've dealt with that, because it is holding us back, whether
Mhm.
we see it or witness it or not. So can you, and I'm not asking for all details, but can you
Mhm.
label some of that trauma for us just so folks can relate a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I'm certainly not alone in my experience. I'll put my researcher hat on for a minute. Current research shares that over 80% of women specifically in addiction recovery have experienced some type of trauma, most often sexual trauma. And so that is a thread that has run through my life in terms of early on. And as I struggled with addiction, being very vulnerable to continued traumatization, in different settings and different situations like that. So I don't usually like to go into detail, although in the book there is some detail from my story, and I think it's important to be honest and open about that. But in terms of specifics, I think again so many people can connect and relate to sexual violence and assault, some of those things, toxic relationships, disordered eating, which has been it was a huge thing in my life. And I think something that so many women that I talk to and work with today struggle with. These kind of layered issues that come with the addiction struggle, but they don't just go away as soon as we quit using substances. And that was something that I would learn early into my recovery, even a couple of years in, that, wow, I've quit using drugs and alcohol, but I still am in these really unhealthy relationships. I still feel like I can't set a boundary. I'm still struggling with disordered eating. So it was a lot of those types of issues.
So, can you give us, I'm not even sure how to best ask this, a guideline general steps to recovery from your trauma, like bullet points.
Well, and that's part of also why I wrote the book. And I'm sorry, I know we're live, but you may hear my German Shepherd barking in the background. I hope that's filtered out. Do you hear her barking?
I did right then, but we're okay
Okay.
with that.
I don't know if it's the mailman or who's outside, but anyways, I apologize for that.
That's
But
okay.
actually, in the book, I talk about 5 specific things because I think, I'm a reader. I've done a lot of reading. I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a lot of, faith-based counseling. And for me, I want solutions that are practical and action oriented, that I can be like, okay, I can do this thing and I will start to heal, or I'll start to move towards healing. And so I really wanted to structure the book with 5 specific, I call them rhythms, to help us move towards healing. And I love the word rhythm because to me, it's action oriented. It's about movement. And I've heard people talk about recovery not as a destination, but as a process. We're continually moving. We're continually, more is being revealed in terms of what needs to be healed, and God continues to reveal more. So I talk about 5 specific rhythms of healing in the book. And one of my favorites, I don't want to give too much away, but so folks can grab the book. And speaking of that, I always want my work to be accessible. So if you're like, I would love the book, but I just can't for whatever reason, please find me online and I will definitely get you a copy. But one of the most impactful rhythms that has helped me has been when I started to learn more about how myself, my body is a temple. And I think for the longest time, I didn't view, because of what I'd experienced, I felt worthless. I felt unloved. I felt unlovable. I certainly didn't feel valuable. And I didn't know and believe in the God who sees me as his beloved daughter, whose body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. And so when I started to learn and understand through a number of different ways that I talk about in the book, that I can help be an advocate for myself, and I can protect my body, and I can value myself and learn that I'm a person that can have dignity and is worthy. That was transformative for me, because trauma for me took away my ability to say no, where I didn't think I had the agency to do that. Trauma interrupted me learning that I could set a boundary, that I could be assertive, in a loving way. And so I go into a lot more detail about that specific rhythm, but honoring our body and our temples, ourselves, and learning how to do that has been transformational for me. And it's a continual process. Again, I mean, and I say it in the intro of the book, I'm working this journey along with you all. But it's been such a healing one.
Is there an end to it? Or is this going to be a lifelong learning process and improvement process?
That's a really good question. And I feel like, our culture is so kind of like self-helpy, you know what I mean? Like it's all about, we want to better ourselves and this and that. And it's really important to grow as people. I talk about in the book this idea of spiritual formation. And a lot of my audience aren't Christian. They may be seeking faith or not quite sure, but there's so many concepts that I think, I know I needed to learn early on. But this idea that we can be formed spiritually is just so beautiful. And I think when we can work on ourselves and grow, it's not like a self-helpy thing where, oh, it's all about me and I want to be better, right? It's about what we can then give back and how we can then be of service. I think God wants our all, and he wants us to be at our best. But we're also human, and we're also flawed, and we're also never going to get
He
there.
knew that when he made us, right?
Right,
And
exactly.
he knew we would encounter these moments, one way
Right.
or the other. I've always had the belief, and I've always prayed. I know your you're talking there about how we are as a culture and society. My
Mm,
goal is to be the person God created me to be,
mm,
wholly, fully, and totally in all ways. I strive
mm,
to be that person.
mhm,
Am I successful? Not at all times, but I've still
mhm,
got that carrot out there that I'm trying to get to. I've got
mhm,
that goal, and if it's unobtainable, as long as I'm going for it, I'm gonna be a better me, and that's gonna be better for you and my wife and everyone else
mhm,
around me. So we
mhm.
continue to strive for that. Uh, what did you learn a lot new about your mom during this experience? You made a comment earlier, but
Mhm,
receiving that booklet, I'll call it, from her, it had to
mhm.
be some things that made you go, wow, I didn't know that. It explains her as well as a part of me.
Yeah, and it was a lot of that, and it was very revealing, and she's said in other interviews that, she's written about things that she's not told a lot of people in her life, and, not things that other people have done, but ways that trauma surfaced in her life, some of the symptoms she experienced and some of the things that she went through personally. And it was hard. I mean, I'll be honest, it was hard. It was hard to read some of the things she'd been through because I love my mom, and at the same time, I mean, I just feel so honored that she is also willing to be so vulnerable because it's hard to write about topics like this. I try to do it in a way that brings some humor when I can and keep it light when I can, but it's
Sure.
hard to be honest about and open with, basically anyone who picks up the book about things that have happened and, things that I've carried a lot of shame for a lot of years in my life. So I'm just so honored. And I think it takes a lot of boldness to step into, like you said, who we are, and own all parts of that and acknowledge. So, yeah, I'm so honored to do this with my mom, but it has been a really hard process at times.
Where have you seen personally the greatest growth? uh, in Caroline, coming from that trauma, that experience, then the experience of the drugs. Where have you where do you look at your life and say, "Wow, I'm
Mm.
getting there"?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of indicators that I am just a new creation, and I might get emotional, but it is overwhelming at times to see how God can transform a life. And if you would have met me 20 years ago, you would not recognize the person I am. I wouldn't be talking. I was terrified of talking to anyone. I would have a hoodie up. I would be chain smoking cigarettes. You would you would not recognize me. The fact that I'm speaking, that I can vocalize how I'm feeling, that I'm not feeling like I need to hide. Um, that I can own some of the hard things that I've done and that have been done to me, but not have shame about those. I can show up and be a mother. I mean, I look at my children and it's just, again, it's overwhelming, what happens in recovery and when our lives are completely changed. And I think that's why I'm so on fire for recovery, because it's like, first of all, I think we're all in recovery, from something. And it's incredible what can happen when we open ourselves to the transformation, that is recovery. So, those are just a couple of examples. But yeah, you wouldn't recognize me. You would not recognize me today, versus how I was back then.
That's interesting, and it goes back to those 2 words, new creation. Uh,
Mhm,
it's not a remodeling, it's just totally new. And
mhm,
I love that thought and the picture that brings and the hope it gives each one of us.
mhm,
Whatever that addiction has been, whatever that struggle, that trauma has been, and as you've said over and over, and I totally agree with, we all go through those moments one way or the other. It's a matter of how we choose to come out. And we start the search for God. He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. And we've got to hope. What do you see in you right now that you most want to turn over to God, have Him make anew? And I recognize and realize He's the miracle worker. But I've always said He may give you the farm, He'll never drive your tractor. And it requires an effort from us. So, what do you see as that area in your life where you've got to put some extra energy into to become who God wants you to be?
Oh, that's a great question. And I love questions like that because I think sometimes with talking about books and talking about good stuff, it's important to get real and like there's still challenges and there's still struggles and things that I need to come to God with and do that publicly, because I think that's where a lot of healing happens too. Something that's been on my heart lately that I feel moved to is to make sure that I'm practicing times where I am just with God, where I am just with Him. So whether that's, morning time, which is a lot less than it used to be now that I have two little ones, it's harder to find that time. But time where I'm just with God. I'm a worker bee, I like to do stuff and I like to do stuff a lot. And I feel like sometimes God is like, okay, Caroline, I know you like to do stuff for me. But I also just want to be with you. And so that's something that I'm really focusing on and thinking about and in wanting to be more intentional with that time.
The way you said worker bee, the thought hit me. You've got the worker part down. Now you just need to get the bee part.
Oh, yeah, there you go. That's nice. I like
Just, be
that.
with God. Just become, behold, and obviously the list goes on. So I like that. Thank you. Uh, we're talking a lot about trauma, and indeed we should be. That's what your book's about, and that's what life's about. What what else do you see is necessary in the fight against addiction toward recovery? What's another big chunk of, we're using this as part of, I don't like you to use the word blame, but it's a source of addiction. What do you see as other sources that we as a culture need to work on if we're going to overcome this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I was speaking to a youth group at a church several months ago, and we were talking about just substance use for adolescents. And as I mentioned, that's really when the height of my drug addiction specifically set in. And I mean, nowadays, gosh, what kids have to go through is just, there's a lot more out there than when I was in active addiction. And we asked the group, what are some of the reasons or triggers do you feel like why kids are using substances? And overwhelmingly, the response was stress. Stress at school, stress at home, stress when you turn on the news or when you're scrolling on social media, just this overwhelming stress of the state of the world and their lives. And I thought that was so interesting and really eye-opening for me that I think for many of us, we're looking for ways to cope. I was looking for ways to cope with my trauma. And I think there's a generation of youth who not only have also probably experienced trauma, but are looking for and seeking ways to cope, and I think being able to offer our testimonies, offer examples, model and walk out what it looks like to have healthy coping. Like I talked about, God's convicting me to spend more time with Him and, not be so busy. But walking those things out, talking about them publicly, providing testimony, I think is going to be huge, especially in the world we're living in. I mean, I heard it from the mouth of babes, from kids themselves. Like this is what they're struggling with, and I see that as a really huge problem and a huge need.
I've I've got another awkward question and since I'm not certain how to ask. Let's say you're walking the beautiful mountains of eastern Tennessee and you've got that view that you love so well. Suddenly you kick a bottle, you look down, you pick it up, and you think, yeah, I think I'll just give this a rub. You're rubbing off the dirt, Genie pops out. He says, I'm going to grant you one question that I will answer concerning addiction recovery. What would you like to ask that, Jeannie? What do you think that question would be?
Wow. Well, you just have some really tough questions here. Well, first of all, I'd want to know more about the genie. I'd want to do a little bit of character study on who this genie is and what motivates this genie,
The,
so I can frame the question. But wow, that's really interesting. Well, I think because a lot of my work, you all know I'm an author and recovery advocate, but I also, have a day job where I do some writing for federal agencies around recovery. And right now, a lot of states in the U.S. And other places, internationally, but states in the U.S. are trying to figure out how to support recovery in their state. So what needs to be funded? Is it recovery housing? Is it collegiate recovery? How can we help spread recovery across states? So I would just want to know, I think, how to better help. How can we help equip and leverage the resources that we have to help the people who need it? And I think a lot of times, even in the advocacy work, we kind of get stuck on, well, of course we need money to do this, of course we need funding to do this, but I want to say the answer is bigger than that. What is the not worldly answer to that? How can we support recovery? So I don't know if I'm answering your question,
no,
but
it,
that's kind
it's
of.
it's not an easy one to answer. Okay, uh,
Mhm.
so what do you see as your next step professionally? And by that, I don't mean just your day job, but it
Mhm.
includes that. What is the next step for the sake of all of us who struggle? Yeah. What do you see as your next step for that? Let me interrupt you here just a second. Eric, can you read that to me, please? We got a comment here,
Mhm.
question kind of thing.
Yeah, it's from Desi. She wants to know, is there a verse that you hold dear to you in your hardest days of growing and healing?
Ooh,
Mm.
good question. Thank you, Desi. Go ahead. I'll interrupt myself with that. Give that an answer.
Oh, I love that question, Desi. Thank you so much. There's a couple, definitely. And I think for me, I was just so rooted in the book of Psalms for a really long time because I connected so much with, the emotion, the anger, the hardship, and the struggle. And I remember feeling this really freeing moment when I was really open and honest with God about how angry I was about what had happened to me. And Psalm 121 and also Psalm 126 really connected with me. And let me just, here, can I read Psalm 126 real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's one of the songs, Song of Ascents. When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dreamed. Our mouths were filled with laughter and our tongues with songs of joy. Then it was said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us, and we are filled with joy. Restore our fortunes, Lord, like streams in and I'm probably pronouncing this wrong, Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. And for me, the last part about, those who go out weeping, I don't know about you, Desi, but I spent a lot of years in a lot of tears, a lot of pain, a lot of weeping. And when I read that today, I am just reminded over and over again how God has redeemed those tears and brought me through those seasons of weeping to be able to carry seed. and to hopefully spread some seeds that will help other people to restore joy, and God is ultimately the joy restorer. So Psalm 121, looking up to God and, having
I lift
him front
mine
and
eyes
center.
into the hills. From whence
Yes.
does my strength come? Yes.
And now in Eastern Tennessee, Randy, I mean, the hills, that's where it's at. And looking up to the Lord, and then also Psalm 126.
Awesome. I like the idea of the streams in the desert. That
Mhm.
that just doesn't make sense. Well, God
Mm.
doesn't try to make sense. He just does what we need out of
Mhm.
his love for us and takes
True.
us to moments and places. And I'm going to guess now those tears of struggle and hurt have changed to tears of humility before God. And
Mm.
we just, there are moments we stand amazed. It's like that beautiful view we had from our Airbnb there in the mountains.
Mhm.
It can only be created by him. I couldn't have even thought of designing such. The
Mhm.
life he has in store for each one of us is that way too. Uh,
Mhm.
it's designed individually. It speaks for how he knew us before we were, while we were knit together in our mother's womb. And so I'm good with all of that. And I continue to trust him as my genie in that bottle as I asked earlier. So back to
Mhm.
that question real quick.
Mhm.
What is it you see as a next step for you? As far as being able to be the person you've talked over and over of your joy of being able to offer encouragement, help, and hope. Uh, yeah, uh, maybe here's a better way to ask it, and it may be more difficult to answer. What's the next chapter in the book of your life?
Mm. Well, I wish I could answer that. I feel like there's only one person that can answer that question, but and I'm glad the genie didn't come back for a visit in this question. I'm glad about that. But I ultimately hope that I can just keep showing up. I just want to show up, and for me today, that looks like being a wife and being a mom. Those are two of the most important things in the world to me. And, being a part of my local church community, most of the amazing things and beautiful things and humbling things that I get to do in the recovery community, I never post about. No one will ever see that. And I hold those moments the most dear, above writing books and above doing podcasts and all of the things. So I hope I can keep showing up in the way that God wants me to, in the way that He'll have me to show up. And yeah, I'm just grateful to be able to be here.
What would happen as a culture, as a society, if we just showed up? The
Mm,
change would be dramatic. We
mm,
wouldn't be able to talk about it. What I'm about to say, forgive me, folks, if you think it's the wrong choice of words, but I'm picturing those who struggle with life that become day laborers. They show up there hoping for a job for the day. God's got a job for our days, each and every one. If we'll show up and perform it,
mhm,
we're going to make our world better, even if it doesn't touch the entire globe. Caroline,
mhm.
is there anything you'd like to wrap this up with? Thank you for your willingness to share. But as we get ready to close off, if there's a
Mhm.
last comment you want to make, we want to hear it.
Well, I just thank you again for having me. I love the work that you all are doing and highlighting stories of recovery. I mean, it is beautiful, and you all are showing up. So thank you for that. Thank you for being of service to the recovery community and just shining a light in the darkness. It is so needed today. And as I mentioned, my book is coming out. It is available for pre-order now. It's officially out in September. If folks have an issue with being able to access it, please find me on social media. But my hope and prayer for this book is that it will move you towards healing in a new way. And
We have
so
your
please,
website
Mhm.
up right now on the screen so
There you go.
folks can have that advantage to be able to do that. Thank you again for your time, your participation, your ministry, your heart, your work. You're a difference maker, and I like difference makers. So,
Wow.
God bless and continue forward. And folks, hang in there. Stay in the battle. There's a way above and beyond. It's through God. Search him out. He's there waiting on you. Amen. God bless. Thank you.